Synagogue, which is an Orthodox synagogue in Midtown Manhattan, and also the executive director of the International Rabbinic Fellowship. And really pleased to doing this with my two esteemed colleagues, and look forward to speaking more and listening more.
I'm Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch. First and foremost, very close friends with Rabbi Ain and Rabbi Herman, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm their senior rabbi at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue on the Upper West Side.
And I'm Rabbi Rachel Ain, the rabbi at Sutton Place Synagogue, a conservative rabbi in Midtown East. So excited to be here to have this conversation. So we want to get started. COVID has been and continues to be on all of our minds. And as many in my community know, my family just had the experience where all four of us, my husband, myself, and our two kids, contracted the disease. And we all experienced it in various ways, from being completely asymptomatic to needing to be in the hospital. And we learned a lot from that experience. We learned about the importance of good science and how learning from last March and April and May made an impact today. We learned about the importance of what it means to have health insurance and, where possible, secure jobs, and how a community can be really, really supportive. But we know that COVID is not going away, even with a vaccine coming sooner than we thought. So we're very excited about that. And so we need to figure out how have synagogues been faring in the spring, and certainly over the last few months from the high holidays to now. How has COVID affected us? That's going to be our conversation today. We hope you enjoy. So Ami, tell us, COVID has been the invisible tidal wave that hit New York in early spring 2020, and here we are in late winter 2020. How has your synagogue in general fared, and how are you holding up?
First of all, it's been a long slog. And how are we holding up that's a really good and interesting question. And I don't really know the answer to that, because a lot depends, both institutionally and personally, on how long this thing lasts, what's the long-lasting damage. I'm sure there will be long-range ramifications, as you know, because you experienced this personally. You know, there are some long-haul COVID patients who don't even know what the ramifications will be in the months and years ahead. I think that's, to a certain degree, without minimizing the people who actually had COVID and the implications for them, I think to a certain degree that we're kind of all going to be long-haul pandemic survivors. We don't know institutionally what the damage will be. We know for sure there'll be damage. We don't know the personal significance on us, the personal ramifications, although we know pretty strongly that there will be. We just can't anticipate what that's going to look like. Personally, and I've consulted with many mental health experts in our community who have affirmed that they fear what I fear, which is a sort of a post-traumatic response in people once we actually do begin to come out of this, because we're still in an emergency and people are kind of focused on getting through the emergency. But when the emergency is over, then, like in mourning, often the hardest part of mourning is not the immediate after effect, but weeks, months, and even years later. So we've already incurred damage institutionally. There are fewer people in our synagogue. There are fewer people to support the synagogue. If it's a one-year event and we can look back in September at the pandemic in the rearview mirror, then I think we'll begin to recover pretty quickly, but not in what's called a V-shaped recovery. I think a lot of our people are going to be traumatized. I don't know how eagerly they will feel to come back to the sanctuary and pray together on Shabbat or on the high holy days. But I anticipate if the news of the vaccine pans out to be as good as the preliminary data suggests, then I anticipate that this year of trauma will be behind us, beginning next September, and we can begin to restore ourselves. And I can talk further in our discussion on what that might look like.
Great. Rabbi Herman.
Thank you both. First of all, I want to say, Rabbi Ain, I'm just very thankful that you and your family are all doing well. And, thank you, Rabbi Hirsch, just the wisdom in those comments and just really the challenge ahead. Just thinking back, it's amazing how things like this just really skew our perception of time. And I was speaking about this in Shul just, a few weeks ago that, at that point it was only 10 months that we were with 25,000 people walking across the Brooklyn Bridge protesting against anti-Semitism. And that was our big concern, which it still is, but it just almost feels. And many of my congregants said that was only 10 months ago. I felt like that might have been 2 years ago. Like just the time aspect of this. And it's really, only 9 months ago, I know I was at the APAC conference with 18,000 people. And that's literally 9 months ago today, was the end of the conference. And, 9 months, gestational period for a baby being born, what, the potential that could be created in the world. And it's only been 9 months. And, it's just mind boggling to think just how short a time that is, because it really feels like so much longer because of just how much we've been apart from the world and how much has really also happened despite almost the world seeming like it was on pause. And, I think back over the course of those 9 months, and it really, happened in stages. As we know the toughness of it. The initial, period in March it was just really this complete unknown and just like shut everything down. And what does that mean? And how are we going to even exist, when our doors aren't open? What does it mean for, synagogue? And, we learned about Zoom, but we quickly discovered Zoom. And then I think April was probably the toughest month in terms of actually, really losing people. I remember every time my phone rang in April, it was just the real horrible, tragedy. And Rabbi Ain, you made the comment that, the technology's progressed, and people are still getting sick and, now, but it just doesn't seem like, we have as many funerals and even Zoom funerals to the extent that we did back in April and, maybe the beginning of May. And that was just a real life tragedy. And then we, really moved on, there was an economic crisis, which is still happening and seems like it's going to hit again, but it was, an economic crisis for many people in our congregation, who had lost their jobs. Some of them, had per diem work and weren't getting work, and what does that mean and how they're going to survive. And then there was a real institutional, hits. Our donations, have been down for the past year, probably about 50%. And, we've had, tenants in the shul who can't pay full rent. And things have been struggling. We had to lay off, one employee, which was, really hard to do. And, that's, in many ways, still with us despite a booming stock market and, talks that there's pent up demand and next year everything's going to be spending, but it's almost like we still have to get there. And, that's challenging. And, then in the summer was sort of like, we've been open, in person. It was a gradual process. Like, what do we feel safe with? How much can we do? And it was just really just a learning experience. And okay, we did outdoors and now can we move indoors? And there are many people who still don't feel safe. And, won't come until there's a vaccine, as much as they're hopeful. And there were the challenges of, how we still remain a presence in the people's lives who aren't coming even when we're open. And, connecting with everybody, and all that sort of, played itself out, over the course of the years. We moved through, sort of different stages of this and different, learning, pieces of it. And, Rabbi Hirsch, I just admire you just even think in the future that, the various future challenges beyond that, the trauma and how people are going to experience this. And, and you see people, probably who've been quarantined together, everyone likes, and this is, challenges social media, that people always put their best foot on social media and it was great at quarantine with the people I love the most. And, but there's some people who are either really completely alone and didn't put that, and some people who might not have been the healthiest relationships and were forced to be, locked in homes with, people that their relationships were not in the best of states at that point. And what does that mean? And just, sometimes we just, need to be cognizant of that. And there was just sort of everything that was sort of out there just kind of, came to the surface for us, this year in 2020.
Well, we certainly know that phone calls to domestic violence organizations have doubled and tripled in this country in 2020 compared to 2019. I'm actually friendly with two different executive directors of two different organizations that work in the DC area, and both of them have said the calls are through the roof, the legal help, because there is so much violence and there is so much abuse and there is so much being trapped, and we need to remember that. So there's the isolation, physical isolation, and then there's the emotional and social isolation, even if you're living with other people, and the fear. I want to pick up, and we've been talking only about COVID, and of course the backdrop also was racial unrest, racial justice unrest, and an election, and everything post-election, which people are still managing and dealing with. So all of that, this frenetic and uncomfortable energy that we're dealing with, and each of us are looking towards 2021 in maybe with different eyes. One thing I want to now pick up on is Ami, I think we can all use first names. We're here talking as friends. Ami, you spoke about we are all long haulers institutionally, and we're going to look at that. And Jason, you spoke about the gestational time of pregnancy, and both of those are, I think, really important medical metaphors as we think about this question. What I'd love to speak about for a few minutes is what changes what therapies did we use when this diagnosis appeared to manage our own institutions? How have we dealt with it? And let's take this from the positive. What has emerged? What is being birthed to life that we might not have even allowed ourselves to imagine when many of us were at that APAC conference? Because I think there have been things that have been birthed that we can celebrate. So what changes have you made to deal with the symptoms of COVID institutionally, and where have we seen life come to be?
Well, first of all, I just comment, number one, we talked about gestation and about long haulers, and neither Jason or I ever gave birth or had COVID, thank God. Right. And you're the only one that actually knows what those
Right.
So we defer to your experiential and descriptive powers, and you might want to share that with us. Also, I just want to comment that it's really interesting how fragile our circumstances are, right? I mean, it's human nature to take things for granted, to build systems, disciplined systems that allow us to deal with the complexities of life, the uncertainties of life, the ups and downs, and you pull out a thread, and sometimes the whole system begins to unravel. So what we find, if all of us spend a lot of time in our apartment, in our homes, but if you have to spend most of your time at home, and you have to do it if you're compelled to do it rather than you do it by choice, it kind of disrupts the whole equilibrium, which unattended, week after week, month after month, with building uncertainty when it's going to end, actually does cause this, has the potential at least to cause this long-term trauma, this long-term damage. The flip side is, as you mentioned, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So we have discovered a few good things about ourselves. First of all, I think many of us, now, and we will be able to conclude in the future, have discovered a certain strength and resilience in our community we didn't necessarily know we had. Our community, for example, rallied around the synagogue in amazing ways, including in financial ways. We decided very early on that we were going to spend essentially all of the free time we had turning completely inwards and focusing on our congregants, trying to establish and create and hold on to that contact that is so essential between the spiritual leaders and the congregants. Like you, I'm sure, and like so many of our colleagues, I hadn't even heard of Zoom until March. So, we've developed over time by necessity systems that I'm sure some of which are going to stay with us over time, technological capacities and various other ways of establishing contact not only with our people, but with all of a sudden we've discovered that we have a worldwide congregation, that people are throughout the world. They're coming to pray with us on Shabbat and listening in on lectures and so on. All of that said, and maybe this is a generational thing because I'm not sure that my younger colleagues agree to the extent that I believe it to be. Synagogues are always going to be face-to-face, in-your-face enterprises. And whatever capacities, the technological capacities we develop and hold on to, even when times return to normal, still, nothing can replace what synagogues offer on a personal face-to-face basis. And so the trick for us is going to be not how to replace a real synagogue with a virtual synagogue, but how to augment a real face-to-face synagogue with the virtual capacities that we've developed over the last few months.
Right. 100%. Jason.
Thank you for that. So I've been thinking about this, in a few ways. On the one hand, I agree with everything, Ami just said. I certainly agree synagogues are going to be face-to-face. We also learned, some of this technology, when I gave, a class on Zoom, suddenly I had people joining, who never were involved in my synagogue, didn't even live anywhere, even in the state. And the capacity to reach more people, was certainly, eye-opening, and just that was really, something special, and obviously wanted to figure out, to continue that, even, post-pandemic. But I'm also trying to think, if we were to think about the core missions, of a synagogue, that, we often refer to them by their Hebrew names, that it's a Beit Knesset, it's a place where people come together. It's a Beit Midrash, it's a place of study. We want people to learn. And it's a Beit Tfilah, we want to elevate people's prayer, so that they're connecting, to God, they're connecting to each other, and they're connecting, someone inside. Have we learned things about how to do them better? And, not only how to do them better, but even post-pandemic, are there things that we could, be doing? And I've been spending time, on the one hand, I sort of feel like I have more free time, and other times I really feel like I have less free time during COVID. But I've had at least some time in these past 9 months, some time, to brainstorm, and just, think about some ideas. And I'll just, share just like one that I've really just kind of been playing on. Some of it I had been thinking about pre-COVID, but COVID sort of heightened, that, notion. So on the one hand, with the technology, we have the ability to reach so many more people, but also means people have access to so much more information and lectures, than they had before. And on the most of the time, the technology we're really using is Zoom. And we've said people have, some people are referring to as Zoom fatigue. So on the one hand, we can reach people virtually, but maybe Zoom is not the best platform. It's the platform that worked during COVID, but when COVID's over, we can come up with better alternatives and ways to do it. But again, just to come to one idea that I've been having is that, maybe we can actually use the skills of a virtual environment to make a real push for Jewish literacy and ask ourselves the question, what does it mean to be a literate Jew? Like, we would say anyone who's an educated Jew should know these basic things. What would the curriculum be? And then can we design some type of virtual platform that anyone can access, and depending on where their own previous knowledge bases, their own skill set can access at different points. And I was thinking this existed before COVID, something like the Khan Academy, which has an entire K through 12 curriculum and short videos. And actually something they discovered pre-COVID is that none of their videos actually have a human teacher, at least on the face. There's always a voice, someone speaking, because despite this actually, and you maybe see this on Zoom, some people looking away, the human face is actually a distraction. People are actually less focused on the substance when they're actually looking at somebody's face. And that occurs in a classroom, and actually if they can look at visuals, and listen, and they also have the ability to rewind, they can learn more. But then what's the role of the synagogue? If we put all this curriculum and anything online, what's the role of the synagogue? And this is a question I asked, also before COVID, but I think it actually has a more salient answer now. And it was a question I posed to the former Lord Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who just passed away less than a month ago. His Shloshim, the 30 days since his passing, is coming up this Sunday, which I think was a real loss of somebody who was a spokesperson for Jewish thought, Jewish wisdom in the world. But I had the opportunity to ask him this question. I said, nowadays, anybody can go online and they can watch a lecture of the greatest rabbis, and they can find a class online of a topic that's of their most interested thing. So I said, what do they need to come to a synagogue to learn for? Why do they come to a class in synagogue? What is value added, if we might? Rabbi Sachs thought about it for a while. He didn't answer the question right away. And then he said as follows. He said, nowadays, anyone can listen to whatever type of music they want. Download an MP3, they put it on their iPod, of whatever genre of music. The quality is, far better than CDs and things of the past. And all the music of the world is right at their fingertips. From $1 a song on iTunes and less if you use Spotify or just watch the music video on YouTube. And he said, yet that doesn't stop people from going to concerts, at least in a pre-COVID world. Probably, I assume they'll still be going to concerts after the pandemic. He said, what does the concert give them? They can hear the same song. And he says, the concert gives people a shared experience of the music together, and also the ability to celebrate the music together. So while we want to inform and teach our congregants, we also understand that there's actually a shared experience of learning Torah, that there's something that we can collectively do together. Zoom sort of does that, but I don't think, nearly as well. When we come back together, I think that'll be a key role for the synagogue, that we'll be doing a lot more virtually, but we need to come together so that we have a shared experience and can share about what we've done virtually and celebrate together what we've done virtually and, continue to build community again, as, Ami said, face-to-face and in your face.
I also think part of what I've learned, it's the essence of what was important. How have we translated that into this virtual digital world? And then how will we re-enter the world? And I've been thinking a lot about the officiation of life cycle events, brisses, baby namings, conversions, weddings, funerals, b'nai mitzvah. I've done it all. I mean, the whole life cycle event over the last several months. And there's one moment in particular that I am really proud of that I'm sure many other people have done, but I thought about it just in a spur of a moment. So we've made the decision in our congregation to use Zoom technology even on Shabbat, and we're a conservative synagogue. And so though many might not have been using it before, it is a decision that we made. And we had a bar mitzvah a few weeks ago, and there were about 10, 15 people in the sanctuary. Everybody else was at home on Zoom. And in our sanctuary, you had a monitor so the people in the sanctuary could see the people on Zoom. And I could see the people on Zoom, and they could see me, and I could see the people in the sanctuary. As the bar mitzvah child was leading the service, people started writing into the chat, Mazel Tov, you're doing great. You sound amazing. You're such a leader. I started reading those chats out loud at different points in the service. And I realized that I was trying to replicate when the Torah is being taken around at the end of the Torah service. It's like the victory lap, that the bar mitzvah kid goes on the victory lap and everybody's high-fiving or elbow or fist pump, whatever it may be. And the chat was the equivalent of walking around and getting the personal Mazel Tov. And so we've now been doing that for the last several B'nai Mitzvah. And it really got me thinking, people just want to connect. So that's how we've been doing it this year. Again, remaining mainly virtual, but not losing the essence of what's important. And the essence was a Jewish community celebrating a young person coming of age and ritually marking that. And that is something that I hope will continue to translate as we get back into whatever normal looks like. I want to bring us to one more topic. As Jason said, we've lost numerous people this year. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and so many others. And so the Supreme Court is now in a very different place than it was right before on Erev Rosh Hashanah when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. And with the appointment and confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, we see already a change in the court in terms of how the court understands religious rights with regard to who can determine how many people are allowed in a sanctuary or a church or a mosque. Now, the discussion in the Supreme Court was about secular versus religious, and did Governor Cuomo have the right to impose distinct limits on religious organizations if he was not making those distinct limits on other indoor organizations? And as we know here in New York, the decision was made, actually, he couldn't do that. And so the limitations that were posed before cannot be posed right now. So what do we do with that? Do we celebrate that as religious leaders, that religion is still given a place? Is it something that concerns us? I have my opinion. I'm curious to hear yours.
Who are you asking?
Whoever would like to jump in.
Jason, you want to go or?
I'll defer to you first.
Or I can go. And then
or Rachel, you have your opinion.
Yeah,
so
why
I'd
don't
love
you-
to hear yours. And we'll love to respond.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So my opinion is that while I would not have expected to necessarily be in agreement with a more conservative court, if I take out the specifics, I actually think the reasoning makes sense. I do think it's important that religious organizations be treated in a sense the same as other secular organizations so that there isn't that distinction made. And the mistake that Governor Cuomo made was speaking about religious institutions as opposed to indoor institutions where you sing. And that to me was the error. Now, just because I think that the decision might have been correct, it doesn't mean we should open, and certainly not open to the degree where we put people in danger. And as leaders in my congregation said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so we, Sutton Place, are taking a very conservative small c approach, especially with my family just having been diagnosed and going through this awful virus. We are taking the reopening quite slowly, but I was surprised to see my own reaction to this court case as I think about how it impacts how we understand the court and religious liberty, and that as a First Amendment right, something that we should, of course, celebrate.
Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, this is a novel coronavirus, meaning nobody alive in any kind of position of authority has ever dealt with anything like what we're going through. And so epidemiologists are going to make mistakes in retrospect. They're not going to have enough data in first pronouncing an approach that 9 months later the data might prove otherwise. Being in public life, running a city, running a state, running a country is very, very complicated, and we see that now. And so the idea that any governor of any state or any mayor looking back at the whole history of the pandemic when this is over and say, this person never made a mistake. Every single decision was a right decision, is just not realistic, and it's not going to happen.
I've got to interrupt you first. Can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
My comment was about Cuomo as an example, because I agree. I think being self-critical or that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. We learn, we grow, we change. So I don't want my criticism to be taken by any viewers as out of context of how I might view one political person at a given moment.
Well said and well put. So that being said, that the governor, no doubt, looking back, will himself at some point say, you know what, we could have done this better, we could have done that better. By and large, in my view, has done a fantastic job in this state, and should be supported. And by the way, I say that with respect to the specific issues that touch on the Jewish community. I frankly am angry and offended by the accusation by some in the Jewish community to suggest that both the mayor and the governor are anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, anti-religious. It's deeply offensive, and it's untrue. In fact, it's the opposite. Both the mayor and the governor, you might say whatever you say about them, neither of them have any animosity to the Jewish community. In fact, to the contrary. They're friends of the Jewish community, and they spent their lives in friendship with the Jewish community. Number one. Number two, we, irrespective of the court decision, we are in all likelihood going to follow, and I think you said this too, Rachel, we're going to follow what the governor proposes in terms of policy. Because whatever the constitutional issue is, and I'm pleased that there are courts that take seriously the protection religious expression. Still, the issue for us, and it may be a little bit different in the Orthodox community, because the Orthodox, by definition, don't use technology on Shabbat. But for us, we are going to follow what the state and the city determine is the right policy, because they have all the experts, and we're going to follow the science. We don't have the experts. They are looking at this day and night, and if they say that congregating in a sanctuary is different in terms of the threat level than walking into a liquor store for 5 minutes and buying a bottle of wine, because our assumption is there is nothing anti-religious or anti-Jewish about that, we are in all likelihood going to follow that approach. That said, all of that said, I've always felt from the very beginning that I wanted always to hear more. Why we have 900 seats in our sanctuary. We've been open since Labor Day, both for Friday night services and Shabbat morning services. And and we have 20 or 30 congregants who come. They're radically socially distanced. Everybody is wearing a mask. We've got air filters that we invested in that are blowing in fresh air. And I am highly confident that there was no case in our synagogue that was either caused or caused others to be ill because of our being open. Because otherwise I would have heard about it, because we have a tracking mechanism and it's just very elaborate. And so we've operated safely. Now, part of that is because the community spread was still low and is still, relative to other parts of the country, fairly low, although it's rising. So the idea that, we would be able to continue to do B'nai Mitzvah, continue to worship on Shabbat, and in this 900-seat sanctuary have 30, 40, 50, or 60 people spread out in radical social distancing. To me, I would want to hear more why that is more dangerous than, say, going to a supermarket or going to a liquor store or something like that. All of that being said, as I mentioned before, we're still going to be inclined to follow the governor's perspective if he renews the limitations on sanctuaries to, say, 10 people or 25 people.
Right. No, absolutely. So, Jason, what do you think?
Thank you again. So I agree with both of you. I want to share just a general thought about the Supreme Court generally this year, particularly, what's happening, and then, just a few thoughts about this decision. So I think there's a trend that people, and I'm not an expert on the court or anything like that, but I'm a rabbi, but there is, I think something about the Supreme Court that is emblematic of what the, three of us are trying to do here is, we got together in the sense that there could be more nuanced and moderate conversation about things. And I think many people who are spectators, citizens of the country, sort of see the court in the same way they see everything else as political. It's like you have 6 conservative justices. This means it's a conservative court and it's the worst thing in the world. And it's obviously going to be different than if it was a liberal court. But I think there's certain things that you're seeing that the Supreme Court doesn't function the way other organs of government do, and even the way the rest of society does in politics. And I maybe want to back up to an earlier decision of the Supreme Court that actually still came out during the pandemic, this summer, which was the decision about protecting transgender rights, which was authored by Justice Gorsuch, one of the more conservative justices, which if you're just going to make your political assumptions a conservative justice, that case would not have come out that way. But there's actually more of a backstory to how that case came out that way, and it was actually written even before the decision. There was an article in the New Yorker about Justice Kagan, and saying how Justice Kagan is probably going to be one of the more influential justices on the liberal, end of the court, which now there are only really 3 of them, and Justice Roberts being, a key one, because it mentioned that a skill that Justice Kagan had is that she's able to reach to her conservative colleagues and use their legal methodology to make arguments for the way she wants the decision to go. And she actually argued to Justice Gorsuch that if he is a legal literalist and is to look as to what the actual words mean, that the word sex in the Article 7 of the Civil Rights litigation, has to be said is, would this person be treated differently if they were a man or a woman for doing the exact same action? And it was actually her argument in appealing to his legal methodology that led Justice Gorsuch to come up with the decision that he wrote. And I think she modeled for us in doing that, and not just for the Supreme Court, but I think modeled for everyone else in society to maybe how political discourse can happen, that you can enter into people's thoughts to where they're coming from, in the Torah's words, Basher Hem Sham, from where they are, to then have a discussion about issues, and maybe even persuade people, on issues that they were differently. And I would expect much more of that, coming from the Supreme Court in the years ahead, in part for Justice Kagan's now being in the minority, but her skill at doing that, and Justice Roberts, who seems to actually have a real concern of the legitimacy of the court, doesn't want to see it delegitimized. Not every decision is going to come out that way, and there's going to obviously a 6-3 court is going to have decisions that people who are on the more liberal progressive end are going to disagree with. But I expect the court to still model real conversation and deeper thinking about issues than you're perhaps seeing, elsewhere in government and the rest of society. And I think there's probably something for us to, all learn from. I think that's, I think that should be just pointed out. And I think just, we as rabbis should be, looking to that as a model of discourse that probably one of the few places in politics you might still see it.
So to bring it back to sort of some of the metaphors we talked about at the beginning, the issue of how you make decisions and issues of gestation. I was thinking, Jason, about what we know coming down the pike. There might continue to be questions about abortion rights in this country. And about a year and a half ago, the Rabbinical Assembly, my governing organization, governing body of conservative rabbis, came out with a pretty powerful statement when Alabama was looking at their abortion laws. And what the Rabbinical Assembly said was, it is a intrusion on the First Amendment rights of Jewish women in particular who understand abortion to be a choice with the health of the mother at play, and prohibiting a woman, a Jewish woman, from getting an abortion is actually an infringement on religious rights. So I am hopeful, maybe naive, but hopeful that the ability to elevate religious rights that we saw in the decision from just last week is something that will in fact be a thread, to use your word, as we think about how that might get seen in other places. It's a real...
That's for sure. I think that's for sure true. I mean, again, I'm not a legal expert or Supreme Court expert, and if I would make a prediction, like I know it was the fear when Justice, Coney Barrett was put on the court that would be the end of Roe v. Wade. I don't imagine anything that drastic. I would imagine probably what's going to happen with the conservative court is it's going to allow more abortion restrictions without totally making it illegal, and it would probably even be state-by-state restrictions than have been there before, which is, of course, very difficult and problematic for women who have to do this, but it is not the sky is, maybe it is the sky is falling for certain women who are, are going to have a real problem getting that abortion if they really need it. But it is not, at least as the predictions have, been made out to be. And it'll be a lot of political work, that there's going to have to be lobbying in different states and, education and going state to state to educate people. But I want to come to the recent, religious, the Supreme Court decision. And as you said, Rachel, in your introduction, there's a larger principle, behind the decision that firmly resonates with me and that I agree with. And just to put it in context, because I know everything is political and divisive in this day and age, I thought back to, it was only briefly a less divisive time. It was still a divisive time. But after 9/11, and the country was in a different type of crisis, but it was in a crisis, and we were dealing with the question of, in the name of the crisis and insecurity, should we let go of certain rights? The issue was the rights of, privacy, particularly the Patriot Act, and should we be letting the FBI listen into our phone calls because they can catch a terrorist? And that's life-saving, pikuach nefesh also. Or maybe we say that even in a crisis, certain values just shouldn't be compromised and, shouldn't be sacrificed. And I would suspect that probably even more so after 9/11, the threat was terrorism as opposed to a virus. I think many people just came down on the side as, we're okay with giving up certain freedoms, but we generally believe that ultimately the Constitution, our rights, were not worth sacrificing even in a crisis. And, does that become different that the crisis is a virus? And I think the decision recognizes that we are in a crisis, it recognizes a virus, but it says, there's certain values that we just still hold, absolutely dear, no matter what. And it was affirming that religion is one of them. Now, where it just gets a little dicey was in the specifics, because actually the specific case in New York. So actually it was already Justice Roberts in his dissent kind of said the case is already moot in New York because these restrictions weren't even in place. So I think the majority wanted to make a statement that wasn't even relevant. And what I found just sort of maybe baffling because of the specifics of the case, and this goes to what Ami was saying, is religion was actually very much singled out in New York's guidelines. But the interesting thing is that religion was singled out to actually be more permissive for religion than I think other similar, activities. I mean, movie theaters are still closed, concert halls are closed, sporting events are closed. Those are all places of public gatherings. We could have just, want to say treat religion the same. We could say if it's a public gathering and it's something people are doing together for a period of time, shut them all and treat synagogues and churches like you do Madison Square Garden and like you do the AMC movie theater across the street from me. But the state didn't do that. It was actually more permissive, of religion than it was of these other places. So that's just sort of what was, baffling about it. And, like Ami, I think, we've obviously not having the ability to use technology, and Shabbat had been, open, but we've been very, restrictive and careful in how we did it. And I'm also confident that there's not been, a case of COVID transmission, in the synagogue, itself. And, I just think we've been really safe. And I think the decision in certain ways, while I celebrate the notion that, religion is still valued and you can't just shut it down because there's a crisis, it makes it a lot harder because it now means that we as rabbis and our synagogue board members who are not health experts now have to be the arbiters of what is safe and what is not safe. And we have to consult experts, and maybe we can ask, government people, but it's much easier when you can say, this is what the government's telling us to do. It was certainly easier to sort of pass the buck that way. And we won't be able to do that, I don't think as easily, going forward. But those are just some of my thoughts on.
Great. So I am so glad we did this. This question of COVID as the backdrop to 2020 is certainly something that we all will be thinking about and reflecting on for years to come. And I'm sure we'll wonder what was birthed this year that we celebrate and what was lost this year that we mourn. And how will the treatments for all of it, wherever we land, make us stronger as individuals and as institutions. And I can't wait till our